Raz, próba mikrofonu. All right, good morning, everybody. How are you today? I hope everything is all right. And you are full of energy, I can see. Ready to start, I would say, working, yes, on a reflection concerning critical realism. So let's begin the second day of the conference. The keynote speaker is Krzysztof Wielecki, professor of sociology, who specializes in the philosophy of man, social ontology, social psychology, and economics. He's a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, member of the International Association for Critical Realism Council, head of the Department of General Sociology and the Department of Social Thought at the Institute of Sociological Sciences of the Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University, and head of the Interfaculty Department of Critical Realism at the Academy of Applied Sciences in Szczecin. Krzysztof Wielecki is also the editor-in-chief of the Polish Journal of Critical Realism, member of the International Sociological Association, the Polish Sociological Association, and the Polish Philosophical Society. He lectures on contemporary and historical social theory. And the title of his today's lecture is Critical Realism, Twilight, Purgatory, or Second Youth, on a certain dilemma between ontology and epistemology. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I, as jazz singer, must use many issues. 1 minute, please. Firstly, I would like say thank you for your presence, especially Doug Porpora. It is he is in the middle of the night in USA now this time. Thank you, Doug, a lot. So. As you know, the title is Critical Realism, Twilight, Purgatory, or Second Youth, on a certain dilemma between ontology and epistemology. British philosophy of the 20th century brought two great paradigmatic proposals. At the beginning of the century, the analytical school, alive in Poland today and beautifully developed by the so-called Lvov Warsaw School, and only at the end of the 20th century, the critical realism of Roy Bhaskar and Margaret Archer, continued by a galaxy of outstanding scholars from all over the world. In Poland and neighboring countries, it is only now gaining momentum, which we owe to Margaret Archer, Doug Porpora, Andrea Maccarini, and all our friends from association. Today, after the death of the founders of this orientation, it is worth asking about its future. uh, especially its future fate. Experience teaches us that new ideas do not always enjoy internal life in science. Older sociologists remember the triumphs of functionalism, which seems to most to be the final voice of a finally mature social theory. Today, the accusation of a functionalist orientation is commonly considered an insult. And yet, although many of the new paradigmatic ideas of their, one moment, please, it will be easier for me. Uh, you can see the text because my English pronunciation is not very well, so maybe it will be easier for us to read some pointers. Uh, uh, Yes, and yet, although many of the new paradigmatic ideas of their time die with their authors, and quite a few are forgotten shortly afterwards, there are some that seems to be lasting and living contribution to science. This is the case with the aforementioned analytic philosophy, certain continuations of phenomenology, several others, and finally with the science of Plato, whose footnotes, as we know, we have been writing forever to millennia. And what about critical realism? Do great ideas die due to some incomprehensible logic of the history of science? Or do we have an influence on this? Does something depend on us? In other words, I ask what we can or cannot do with the legacy left to us by the founders of critical realism. I'm convinced that it is. I see the chances of its survival in very deeply embedded foundations of the orientation by Bhaskar and Archer. It is rooted in the absolute foundation of ontological, epistemological, and ethical thought. Thanks to this, it is important in its essence. But that is also why it opens up extremely broad perspectives for research in specific sciences such as sociology, psychology, pedagogy, economics, anthropology, and many others, of course. How not to lose this heritage? Let's repeat me. In other words, I'm asking what we can or cannot do with the legacy left to us by the founders of critical realism. I believe that in the search for answers to these questions, it will be useful to understand the historical, political, and cultural context of the last quarter of the 20th century, when the ideas of critical realism appeared in the minds of Bhaskar and Archer. Their concepts were truly unusual at that time. It was a time of relatively fresh memories of the hecatomb of the First and Second World Wars, which brought strong nihilistic moods, visible, for example, in the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre or Martin Heidegger. But a young generation was also entering the social space who had no memory of the Nazi night. However, they did not share at all at the self-admiration, somewhat justified, of their parents' generation, who were proud of the work of rebuilding after the war's economic, moral, cultural, and political destructions. In the light of the propaganda of success in the 60s and 70s, the young were irritated by the hypocrisy of elderly. They rather saw that adults had no place for them in their world, lived contrary to proclaimed values, waged brutal and bloody wars, and on top of that, lost them. This was a time when a few scholars, such as those associated with the so-called Club of Rome, noticed the civilizational background of great changes that affected all dimensions of human life, individual and collective. We are talking about a great civilizational crisis which neither the then generation of rebellious youth nor any other to this day including, managed to cope with. Quite the opposite. Currently, this crisis is growing and taking on extremely dangerous form. So I believe we need some response of that from science, on that from science. Uh, There is no room here for a deeper analysis of the cause and effects of the post-industrial civilizational crisis. I have written about it extensively elsewhere. It will suffice to say that this crisis, along with all dimensions of life, have also affected the humanities. It has given rise to a new scientific and artistic trend, postmodernity. I can repeat here the entire argument, the paradigmatic stratification that began in the last quarter of the 20th century, which I included in several of my works. I need to refer interested person to the appropriate texts. I wrote there about the fixation of those theorists whom I classify as belonging to the objectivist paradigms. Uh, Please show us the model. I suppose it is down. Oh yes, this model. Thank you. So I wrote there about the fixation of those theorists whom I classify as belonging to the objectivist paradigms. And I also mentioned there that mental disorder of the schizoid subjectivist paradigms and the hopes that can be associated in these difficult times with theories of dialectical synthesis. I am absolutely convinced that among them, critical realism is the brightest light at the end of the tunnel. I suppose that continuing the legacy of Bhaskar and Archer, especially through the fundamental assumptions of critical realism that situate it within a paradigm of dialectical synthesis, is key to the lasting relevance of our orientation. This includes the primacy of ontological over epistemological reflection and, particularly in Archer works, a holistic perspective that unites individual human subjectivity with civilizational level processes in a single framework. I must firmly restrain my ambition to review the major issues that Bhaskar and Archer have opened up for us, thereby giving critical realism a timeless character, I think. I will try to demonstrate, using only one example, certain selected areas of possibilities for the development of critical realism, strongly based on the legacy of its creators, but also seeking new areas for the future. One of these problems concerns issues that seem secondary to critical realism, especially Bhaskar's, and are an incredibly important lecture for the contemporary science. If I can ask you to show it in this moment. This, in my opinion, is the foundation of the great success of critical realism, its past and future achievements. Just as Emmanuel Levinas carried out a Copernican revolution, reversing the long tradition dating back to the ancient Greeks of fixation on epistemology in favor of ethics. So critical realism, I think, turns everything upside down, to paraphrase Karl Marx, and builds on the legs that is ontology. The Greek orientation of philosophy has been questioned before. Friedrich Nietzsche did not spare criticism in the respect, generously dishing out invectives. But in return, he was only able to offer the expression of a restless spirit, constantly questioning everything and obsessively seeking its authenticity in its constant negation. In this way, he gave a good beginning to what I call the subjectivist paradigms. It has its advantages. It is worth taking his criticism of the objectivist paradigm seriously. It is vital to open up to the humanities a space of spontaneous thinking, penetrating what is unknowable but real and important. Its radical forms, however, especially perhaps in postmodernism, this way of thinking creates something like cosmic black holes, which ultimately absorbs not at all massive dwarfs of the real world, including people and their subjectivity. I have called the third of the great paradigm of dialectical synthesis. It draws on both paradigms and transcends them, avoiding with more or less success the pitfalls of eclecticism, their contradictions, and aporias. Examples of sociology practiced in this way can be found in the work of authors such as first and foremost Margaret Archer, Douglas Porpora, and Andrea Maccarini. I'm sure other representatives of critical realism should also be mentioned here. Their works are characterized by great erudition, axiological and often ideological and political commitment, terminological innovation, foregrounding in the body of philosophy, a narrative that uses proposition rather than categorical assertions. They frequently speak, to use Charles Taylor's phrase, in a more subtle language. The founders of these paradigms are fully aware of the weakness of the objectivist orientation. They are aware of the impossibility of cognition in the spirit of the Enlightenment, of the fact that the scholar cannot know human beings, society, and culture in any other way than subjectively. Excuse me. They are also aware of the fallibility of the senses and reason, of the entanglement of cognitive process with values, prejudices, and interests, of their dependence on social perceptions. Dialectical synthesis theorists share many reservations, especially postmodern ones, but they want to go beyond their scruples, uh, uh, beyond the sense of impossibility that comes from the postmodern critic. They draw on a variety of sources of knowledge gathered by traditional so-called hard methods and by soft methods inherent in subjectivist humanities. All these authors have a very solid philosophical background. It appears that this orientation cannot exist without a background in philosophy and philosophical knowledge. They also combine many other skills. They work freely with economic, anthropological, and psychological knowledge. Furthermore, they reinterpret the findings of the science in the more or less common language, making them a useful tool for interpretation and understanding. Their theories are difficult because the world they describe and explain is not simple. I remember some journalist asked Maggie if she can write more simple. No, she answered very shortly. It's true. The world is too complicated for that. Here we come to perhaps the most important dilemma that Bhaskar and Archer have opened up for us and which contemporary critical realists should, I believe, try to resolve. Let me repeat. One must absolutely agree with the assumption of the primacy of ontological reflection over epistemological reflection, which in the case of research in the practical science means that first one must know what one is investigating, what its nature is, and only then one can possibly investigate whether it is knowable, possibly to what extent and in what way. In fact, however, we are falling into a vicious circle, or more precisely, into circular reasoning. There arises the problem that I'm writing about, namely, how is it possible to make any statements about the nature of what is the subject of our study if we are unable to critically determine the sources of the preliminary knowledge that we have on this subject? We are dealing here with a real trap, it seems to me. Let me emphasize that this vicious circle consists in the fact that without certain ontological knowledge, we cannot make epistemological judgments. and without the latter, assert anything about the former. If I understand correctly, a critical realist, in order to be able to discuss ontological assumption, must have some knowledge, prior, parallel, subsequent, about what truth is, and whether and possibly how it is knowable. Of course, he realizes that there is no certain and final knowledge. This somewhat reduces the pressure for epistemological infallibility. Howbeit, he would also prefer that his ontological assumption be closer to the truth than further away, even if they cannot be identical with it. In other words, a scientific statement should differ in some way from completely colloquialism, including obvious gibberish. In the correspondence I conducted on this subject with Douglas Porpora, he wrote to me. He agreed to read his response. I hear your question on epistemology. My own view is that there is no foundational basis to true knowledge. I guess my view is Aristotelian. That when we move outside of mathematics or logic, where we can offer actual proofs, we are in the domain instead of rhetoric. But it is not the rhetoric of the sophists who suggested that our rhetoric creates reality. It is Aristotle's rhetoric, which proposes that our rhetoric is what leads us to know the independent truth. I think we can arrive at truth without formal rules for doing so. We determine truth fallibly through rhetorical argument, which means it is a collective effort. We need to listen to and weigh evidence from different quarters. Juries do it. Juries do it. It is always fallibly, but there is a difference between the truth itself and our truth judgments, which may or may not get it right. That, anyway, is my position. Doug's position. Perhaps it was here that Porpora captured the essence of critical realism. There is no objective truth of the researcher, but there is the truth of reality. We arrive at this somehow, though never fully, somewhat like, if I understand Porpora correctly, Immanuel Kant arrived at the categorical imperative. And whoever would like to know more about how such truth comes about may reach for the works of Erwin Goffman. So I stop say about it. I'm very convinced by the opinion of this outstanding critical realism. However, as is often the case in true science, a good answer gives rise to further questions. Among others, about the scope of uncertainty of fallible truths, as Porpora says. A jury sometimes decides the difference between life and death. So it would be best if they made as little error as possible. Neither, and as experience sometimes teaches, guarantees freedom or even survival to the innocent. Besides the imp, which no doubt slumbers in every scholar, tempts me to ponder how such a process of truth recognition takes place in us and whether it can be optimized, at least in science. I must be agreed that humanities, including the social sciences, are not able to go beyond doxa, which we know from Parmenides and especially from Plato. And this gives rise to the problem of truth in the science analyzed here. But there is still the possibility of better or worse justification on unprovable hypotheses. Perhaps the solution to this dilemma could be sought in intuition, because perhaps this is what Porpora had in mind, who, like Plato and Aristotle, suggested, if I understand his thought correctly, that beyond episteme, I mean the domains of mathematics and logic, but not in their entirety, which, however, can be better or worse justified. And this better is what I'm concerned about here. As Jan Woleński wrote, Aristotle created the first general model of scientific research. He believed that science should be based on obvious and therefore indisputable general assumptions, and all the rest of it was to be the result of deduction according to the rules of syllogistic, formal logic. In other words, bodies of theoretical knowledge constitute categorical deductive systems. Agreed. But we must immediately ask, where can we get the conviction of the indisputability, that is the obviousness of such general assumptions? We could find some explanation in Descartes. But this brings us, I think, to the question of intuition, because it is about the sources of the assumptions. For Plato, these are the ideas. We have this in our minds, although unfortunately forgotten. But when it comes to social sciences, as we will say today, they mainly deal with what is related to human actions. Partly, this would be what the Greek called techne. Kant, on the other hand, would define it as a sphere of practical reason. I understand it. As I understand it, Porpora refers to this idea when he writes about something like discursive truth, rhetoric truth. Descartes distinguishes three types of reality and three types of truth corresponding to them. Therefore, that which is least important to human being is material. No, we know it through the senses. More important matters for reason. The sources of fundamental truths is intuition. Is intuition the bridge that allows us to move from ontological to epistemological assumptions and from epistemological to ontological ones? If so, we would receive support from Henry Bergson. He claimed, however, that intelligence remains the luminous nucleus around which instinct, even enlarged and purified into intuition, forms only a vague nebulosity. But in default of so-called properly knowledge reserved to pure intelligence, intuition may enable us to grasp what is that intelligence fails to give us. He also wrote, however, that we do not in a poor, disinterested way, hence our intellect is not objective, but on the contrary, it falsifies, deforms, and distorts. It serves practical purposes and fulfills functions in relation to the need for communication between people. It makes static what is dynamic, structures what is in reality holistic. It tries to understand clearly and simply what is complicated and unclear. By simplifying, it creates an image of mechanical order. It captures in strict categories, preferably quantified, what is not subject to them by nature. The intellect, especially in its scientific variety, relativizes, always relates something to something contrary to life as it is. The practical nature of the intellect causes it to distort not only concept and judgments, but also the observation themselves. I think that this critique of intellect, especially of scientific thinking, can be repeated today. We find in it a justification for porpora, epistemological skepticism. According to Bergson, intuition does not possess the defect of intellect. It is then the perspective of getting out of the impasse. The dialectics of this thinker allows him to resolve the dualism of intellect and intuition. Intellect, therefore, provides, in his opinion, clear but untrue knowledge, while intuition is true but imprecise. Perhaps, however, understanding how to defend the assumption of the primacy of ontology over epistemology, characteristic of critical realism, requires something more. I mean the reconstruction of the real cognitive process in a human being. It cannot be ruled out that it requires a different understanding of intuition. It is worth considering whether its phenomenological conception will not be helpful here. As is well known, supporters of this orientation are convinced that phenomenological reduction causes reality, including its essence and processes, to reveal itself to us. Let's us note that this reduction requires the suspicion, a push, uh, a push of what we already know, including all scientific knowledge. This seems to be intriguing assumption that only such an unbiased mind experiences reality. Uh, Perhaps, but how? It seems that the aforementioned intuition is some idea for the answer. There is no space here to develop this thread, however, just to signal the problem. Let us note that for Edmund Husserl, ontology is the science of essences. That is what for Bhaskar is the basis of scientific knowledge. However, one could ask, where does person get the knowledge of this essence from? The creator of phenomenology refers here to Immanuel Kant, claiming that this knowledge is given to us a priori, in contrast to facts which are knowable a posteriori. When the scholar wrote, we must return to the things themselves, he had in mind meanings that are given to us directly intuitively. But as we must remember, he did not understand intuition in a psychological way, but as a direct discovery of reality in the pre-theoretical way, a return to that which is revealed to consciousness after the suspension epoch of all theorizing, secondary association, or any content previously mediated in anything. One might ask, however, how is this knowledge given to us? Only through the senses? Is a matter of purely empirical knowledge? This is probably what Husserl had in mind. But if so, then first of all, as phenomenology been repeatedly accused, for example, Derrida, Gadamer, and others, such cognition is probably impossible. And precisely for psychological reasons. Human person does not cognize in this way. And for us, critical realists, this argument is on fundamental importance, I mean. In the German thinker, if the German thinker distinguished formal or general ontology from regional or detailed ontology, then it is precisely on the basis of knowledge of the onticity, of the nature of person and his cognition that we must state with regret that Husserl presented a theoretical model of something that does not exist and cannot exist. On the other hand, the understanding of intuition by the creator of phenomenology is not unambiguous. After all, he wrote about the ability of phenomenological reduction to recognize the essence. He claimed that the intuition of ideas is nothing more than the perception of the essence of a thing, that as he wrote, seeing an essence is also precisely intuition. Therefore, it is possible on the basis of the assumptions of phenomenology. The question immediately arises how? Not by abstraction, generalization, or analysis, but by examining how this essence reveals itself to us in direct perception. But it cannot reveal itself to the senses, because essence is something immaterial. Shortly thereafter, in the same work, Husserl added, enough now of absurd theories. Uh, no conceivable theory can make us err with respect to the principle of all principles that every originary presentive intuition is a legitimizing source of cognition, that everything originally, so to speak, in its personal actuality, offered to us in intuition is to be accepted simply as what it is present as being, but also only within the limits in which it is presented there. So, not empirically. Let's ask is this essential insight? Does it have anything in common, the intuition of Plato's idea or the illumination of St. Augustine? Husserl wrote about free variation or imaginative variation, as well as eidetic. It was supposed to lead to what is unchangeable, that is essence. This variation is an operation within the framework of the method called imaginative variation. It consists on imagining an object of the type being studied and differentiating its feature to discover what is common to all variations, so what is essence. We can clearly see then that we do not know the essence sensually, but rationally, as it seems to follow from this. However, Husserl repeated after Brentano that consciousness is always intentional. Therefore, we must know in some way beyond intention. Of the three ways in human being knows, and which we have synthetically gathered with the help of the aforementioned concept of the scales, it is not the senses, nor intuition, but reflexivity that leads us to know what is so hidden from our knowledge unless we follow the recommendation of phenomenologists. The problem, however, is that in order to make this variation, which, as we already know, is a work of imagination, we must probably appeal to existing knowledge. That is to what Husserl forbade. It seems, if I understand correctly, that Husserl's concept of intuition is not entirely unambiguous. It is therefore difficult to answer the question of whether it's some path by which critical realists can seek a solution of the dilemma resulting from the priority given to ontology over epistemology. This significantly complicates the possibility of referring to philosophical foundation by scholars working in the social sciences, which I strongly recommended at the beginning. But I do not deviate from this. But one must understand how difficult it is, especially for a sociologist or a representative of other sciences, if he is not a philosopher but an uncreative user of philosophy. Such acts of creative use of philosophy can only be, of course, proposal that we submit under our sole responsibility. Secondly, it is worth considering whether phenomenology is not a promising perspective for solving the dilemma of critical realism discussed here, which would, however, require a redefinition of intuition. It seems to me that several promising leads can be founded here. I'm thinking in particular of the philosophy of Edith Stein, who, especially in the later period of her work, willingly referred to the St. Augustine. So, I did not intend to answer the doubts I raised here. I only wanted to present them as an example of a rich perspective of the development of critical realism. It is not an easy perspective, as you can see. It's worth remembering that Margaret Archer wrote that in science, good fruits hangs low on trees. But if we do not stop conducting the most basic reflection in critical realism, referring to the classics of orientation, it will be important in the future as well. Fundamental reflection is what makes science alive and bodes well for its future. In the case of critical realism, thanks to Bhaskar and Archer, it is cornerstone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for this lecture. And now we begin the discussion.
Yeah.
And we are waiting for questions. And we have the first person. And yes, please.
Thanks very much for a really stimulating talk there, which I really enjoyed. I'm just trying to get my thoughts in order on it, and I probably will get them in the wrong order as I say this. But I think you talked a lot about intuition, but to me that sounds very much along the lines of what Dänemark et al. Say in their book around explaining society as overcoded abduction. It's just, I believe it's right, therefore it must be right, and I need to find reasons to justify my own belief. And I compare that to what you don't mention at all in your presentation of the method of retroduction, because you talked about the scientific method of being Aristotle's scientific method, which is a rejection by Bhaskar when he talks about retroductions being the scientific method of explanation. And I would see that as being a fundamental core of critical realism, which I was interested you didn't mention in your discussion in any way. I just really just wanted to put that back as a thought, really.
Yeah, thanks. The main subject of my presentation is to present questions. What after Bhaskar and Archer? Because I'm afraid, I'm almost sure that we should seek some road for us, uh, uh, which could be a continuation of the principles of Archer and Bhaskar, but with open eyes for next problems. Science must be go on. Science must develop, and it is our duty, I suppose. The question of intuition was only in Magnus for me. It was exercise. Uh, why we can shoot new areas for our research. I not very admire phenomenology. I like it, but I don't believe that it is the perspective for, because I feel as critical realist. So I very respect the sentence of Husserl to come back to the reality. But how, it is another question. And I only exercise if this road who maybe show us Husserl is useful for us. But I'm sure of that. I'm only try to go on this road. So if intuition was my main subject, of course I should try to present this question in all tradition and all perspectives as is possible, But it's not my main subject. I agree with you, of course, but it is a question for another presentation. I suppose not mine, because this is not my specialization. I only try find new road to develop the assumptions Bhaskar and Maggie. Yes, of course, I don't know exactly. uh, because I suppose we should rather question, formulate questions than answers. But I suppose that very important for this problem is the conception of discard. We have 3 points of view to on the reality by our senses, by our reason, and by our intuition. I can imagine situation when Susanna, for example, take prysznic, take shower. Oh, thank you. Take shower, and several old men watching on her. One of them see her under the door, and he is obvious that for him is obvious that Susanna is the beautiful part of her left leg, because he could see only this. The second, who is watching by a hole or in the door, is absolutely sure that Susanna is absolutely different from that, because he is one part of his hand, and so on and so on. So all of these old men says truth, but it is not truth enough for critical realists, I suppose, because for us it's very important the truth on reality, and Susanna is not several parts of her body, or even all parts of her body, and even all her body at all, but he is something more. And the essence of Susanna is further from this knowledge. And this is, I think, the situation in our sciences. Psychology knows Susanna, try understand Susanna from psychological points, and so on. So, could we repeat? That I mean that some point of for starting to this reflection, I have no answer, as I said, is theory of Descartes, of three sources of knowledge, human knowledge, and because intuition is not very popular between especially positivist scientists, I, in my presentation, take my oh, excuse me, I am tired. Only to this one of these all factors of human knowable.
There are also two participants online who would like to ask a question, and first is Professor Douglas Porpora, please. Oh,
No, I'm first, aren't I? And I'm a professor
okay.
too.
Oh, so Priscilla Anderson, yes. I was informed that it was Douglas Porpora who wanted to ask a question, but all right, that's all right. Okay. So number one is, number two is, first hand up is Priscilla Alderson, please.
Thank you very much for your lecture on the primacy of ontology, a central critical realist theme. You say that we find truth through reasoning and discursive rhetoric, but also, as critical realism tells us, with its attention to the four planes of social being that begin with bodies in material relations to nature. Babies work out that their hand is attached to their arm, it is attached to their body. They work out that they can hold things, push and pull. Numerous complex tasks, lifelong truth learned through the senses and the body. Of course, there's some intuition, but this is primarily an intellectual development of reflection. You say, for instance, that juries rely on recorded evidence, but these days, often the crime has been videoed. They can see it. Having been on a jury, I know that we also rely on our impressions of the people, how they behave in the dock and the witness box. And I just wonder if you're working with the epistemic fallacy of collapsing all material things into the intellect. You say that the material through the senses is least important to humans. I think the opposite. Would you like to ask anyone in Gaza what really matters to humans, the intellectual or the material? And finally, you did say that consciousness is always intentional. Well, when we're conscious of pain and distress, we don't intend to suffer it, it's imposed on us. So consciousness is enormously complex, of coming within and flooding in without. A lot of it unwanted and unintended, surely. I would welcome your comments on my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My comment is that I agree with you. My own general assumption is that people, human beings, don't know reality separately through the senses, through the intuition, and through the reasons, but together as one act of experience. And the free order of the world, as Maggie wrote, is our area which we are experience in the act, in the only one act, as a human being, generally. So body is very important, and the sanctions and Russian and so all sources of knowledge. It is only differentiation, academical differentiation. In reality, it is one act, I suppose.
What is one act?
One act to experiencing reality by human being in their life, in the processes of life. For example, I listen to you, and I intend to understand and be enough wise to answer you. And my my process of cognition is focuses on this intention, but I don't do it separately by my senses and by my intuition and by my brain, but together in one act.
So that the ontology and the reality of the independent reality that we receive through our five senses it's so central to ontology, isn't it? Ontology does not depend on the epistemology, the way that we interpret it.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I don't know finally where from. We have ontological assumptions, but we have it firstly, I suppose. And I suppose it is correct in critical realism. Ontology is, because I suppose that all people, not only scientists, are philosophers, are scientists, because all we try to know something about our reality, about ourselves and so on. And the mechanism of knowledging, of knowing are the same in philosophers and in all rest people. So my intention is to understand, not only as psychologists, but as sociologists and philosopher too, how people do it. How is this process? And I suppose that firstly, we have some ontological intuition, ontological presumptions, because I can't definitely says if it is intuition or what.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, Douglas Purpura, please. Let's turn on your microphone because it is turned off. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you,
Thank-
Christoph, for your presentation, for considering what I had to say. I agree with what Priscilla said too, that we're embedded in a world, and that what we know always is going to exceed what we can say in multiple ways. And I know that you agree with that as well. My question about intuition is, well, it's a question, I guess it's a comment to respond to, is that, so one of the part of Bhaskar's Holy Trinity, the second part is epistemic relativism. So we all have different intuitions and we're guided by our intuitions always. But I guess focusing on intuition can make it seem like knowledge is an individual act, when in fact, just as you and Priscilla were talking to each other, we bring different perspectives and different intuitions, and we test our own views in a way that's not formulaic, but always depends on the context, against other people's intuitions, so that knowledge. You say that you sort of describe me as being skeptical. I would say that one of the things about critical realism is epistemic humility. That I always, say that the post-structuralists don't believe in truth, but they think they have it. We critical realists believe in truth, but we don't necessarily think we've got the whole truth. So that, I guess the main thing I'm trying to say is, you really have a battle of intuitions or a play of intuitions, and that when we reach truth as in a jury, it's a collective. It's a collective enterprise, and that you really can't reach truth without talking to people who disagree with you. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much. Yes, I remember I read your text where you wrote that after all, we are talking, and after that, we are thinking what we said. It is very important case for me. Why it is possible? What is mechanisms of our thinking? I agree with that. I too answer your question, and in the same time, and maybe a little after, I think is I good understand the questions, is if I good form my sentences, and so on and so on. But this is the next process. What is the essence of our thinking, of our knowledge? I don't know. I suppose that for critical realists is very useful. It will be very useful to try to understand it. To try, I'm not sure. I'm nothing says as obvious, of course, but. My hypothesis is that after Bhaskar and Archer, we should themselves try find the road to develop the tradition of critical realism, but of course strictly attaches to this tradition. That's all.
Okay, it's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed your presentation. I have maybe 2 points to maybe discuss with you. The first one concerns the first phenomenological reduction, that is transcendental phenomenological reduction. I wonder if there is not an aspect that we could see perhaps some synergy or similarity to critical realism, which is the aspect that also talked about us having this natural attitude towards the world. That is, we assume that the world is out there and we would just be able to somehow get to it. The purpose or part of the purposes of the transcendental reduction is to deeply understand that this natural attitude is to be sort of re-examined, and that we need to think about how our own senses are sense bestowing. That is, we actually give meaning and we have a lot of interpretations of what the reality is like, and we try to then get rid of all of those and then get back to the things in themselves. And I wonder if there is not some similarity in that fact of transcendental reduction to critical realism. And the second point I wanted to make was really about the example you gave about, watching this woman take a shower or something like that. I think that there is a similar example, perhaps, in Charles Saunders Peirce, when he talked about this murder scene. And I don't know, this might be an example that's familiar to the critical realism, because he was saying that, okay, well, there was murder that took place. There were two witnesses. One was blind, the other one was deaf. The blind person only heard a bang, a gunshot. Okay. And the deaf person only saw, somebody, being shot at or something like that, or, maybe saw a suspect or something. What I think that, Peirce was trying to draw from that parable is that, okay, well, yeah, well, one person or, one sense or one instrument cannot sort of give us the whole picture, but when you put the two and two together, you get, more of a full picture. And that kind of, led me to think, when we talked about intuition, that perhaps in practice it's always a combination of a lot of the senses that we've got, a lot of the reasoning that we've got, and then we somehow thought that that was intuition. But in fact, it's really colored by a lot of things. And I just wonder if you might be able to comment on that. And of course, the last thing is of course, the danger of intuition, because it is uncommunicable, you know, in the sense of the word. Yeah, and people do crazy things, you know, on the grounds of their intuition.
Thank you very much. Do you know, I'm studied under my teachers was their professor was Roman Garden. His professor was Husserl. So I have to say that I don't understand how, in how way the phenomenological reduction can provide us directly to the truth. I don't know why. I suppose that Husserl gave us some top, some path interesting for us, but in a ground of critical realism, I don't think if phenomenology is main road for us. But intuition, if we will overworked this term with tradition, Bergson, St. Augustine, Husserl, and so on and so on, maybe is some path for us. But our point of mention of reference is for critical realists, I mean, is reality. Not some very complicated process of forgotten, of forgot, try to forget of what we know, because it is impossible, I suppose. So it is not my main point of my proposition. My point of proposition is only to examine the term of intuition and overwork it with agreed with critical realism assumptions. And how to do it, I don't know now, but maybe tomorrow, I believe.
Else would like to ask a question. You were talking about this way of getting to know the truth about the reality, and it was really, I would say, impressive. And you said about, I would say, two lenses of knowing the truth. I think the reason and the intuition. Yes, the reason, as you said, is precise, but paradoxically can deform reality or the image of reality. Yes. And at the same time, intuition is imprecise, but is so natural, yes, that gives us some certain truths about the reality. And my question is, how can the reason and the intuition cooperate from the perspective of critical realism in order to get the precise and true image of the truth? So in which moment you have to turn on the intuition and the reason? Where, in which moment in which they can cooperate, go together in order to get the right image of the true reality?
Excellent. And of course, I would like to know how it is possible, the processes, because this process is something real. People thinks and feel in some way. How? What processes going to people knowledge? It is important, I suppose, for critical realism. Although I would like to repeat that ontological assumptions are more important for me and I suppose for critical realism. So I don't know how to answer for your question because I don't know how the process are processes are and of course here in this moment I can try to think about it and answer something but it is not important what I will think in this moment. This is very important question. I suppose it is worth to think about it. But I think about it, but only when I have free time, because my main interests are ontology of human being, on culture, on society. Although I know that, as I said, how we do, how we are going to our knowledge through this free ways is important. But it is not, I suppose, the main, the most important problem, not only for me, but for critical realists too. Yesterday, we could possibility to listen to presentation of GNU, and I suppose I heard in his presentation some path to understand it. But I'm not sure because I should have time for rethinking it. But maybe it is a good path for critical realism to going out of what we all know wonderfully because we are studying Vaskar and Archer many years. And I suppose most of us read many books and listened to his her and his lectures and so on.
Thank you very much indeed for your lecture, for all the answers. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. All right, now let's have a coffee break. And after the coffee break, there's work in panels. Yes, please, those who take part in our conference online, just please click the right link. At 1 p.m. is lunch, and at 2 p.m. We have this panel on the legacy of Margaret Archer. Thank you.